Welcome everybody to this webinar hosted by Deafblind Information Australia, which is a project funded by the National Disability Insurance Agency. I'd like to start by welcoming everybody and acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands that we're meeting across this evening. I am on the land of the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past and present, and also extend a warm welcome to any First Nations people that we have with us this evening. On Kulin Nation at the moment, it's the season of Purneet, which is tadpole season. So I've been hearing a lot of frogs, but yeah, haven't seen any tadpoles. I'm now really delighted to introduce Steve Rose, who is a highly skilled speech pathologist, and I'm lucky enough to have met at a few deafblind conferences and also when he was working at Sense UK. So I'll hand over to Steve, who I know is going to give us a great session this evening. It's a topic that people often request and get really stuck with. And I know that Steve does a wonderful job of explaining and breaking it down in a really meaningful way. He'll be talking to us this evening about from emerging gestures to tactile sign language. So just one piece of housekeeping. If you are wanting to use captions, there are two options. So you can go to the CC button at the bottom of the page, which says live transcript, and click on show captions. Or in the chat, there is a link to the OneCap app, so you can click on that to get captions and adjust them according to your needs. So I'll now hand over to Steve. Sorry, one more piece of housekeeping. We also would encourage you to ask questions as we go, that using the Q&A button down the bottom. We prefer people to use the Q&A button rather than the comments or chat section. And Steve will answer those. Okay, I'm pretty sure that's all the housekeeping. And finally, I now will hand over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you also for asking me to join you this evening, or this morning for me. It really is a pleasure to be here and to talk to you about something that I'm really interested in, but I also know that other people, as Mary says, are very interested, and hopefully I'll talk a bit, introduce myself in just a second, but I'll just talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. And essentially we're going to break things down into three parts, and we're going to be exploring the emergence of gestures and language in the tactile mode. So we're going to think a little bit about, well, what does make, what would tactile language look like? What are the components of that? We're going to think about how do we sort of explore and mediate exchanges and reciprocity, turn-taking. We'll also then go on to the next section, which is about how emerging gestures and individual expressions relate to tactile sign language. And then the last section will be around concepts, cultural expressions, and cultural language. So that's my plan for this evening. So, a little bit about me. I am a speech language therapist or speech pathologist in your area of the world. I really do have a strong, I consider myself sort of a developmentalist really, and my emphasis is on children, but not exclusively. And a lot of my work, I focus on the communicative potential and how people relate to each other. I know I have a bit of a UK perspective, but hopefully there's enough here that's shared that will kind of keep things broad enough to kind of be common for you all. I also consider myself a seeker of knowledge, and I suppose it's that kind of a lifelong learning, I suppose, from, there are some great academics who've done lots of research in this field, and I'm always grateful for their research and their work, but I'm very eager to translate into that very academic thinking into more practical everyday work with people. And this image always reminds me that there's not always, it's two sides of the one-way street. There isn't always one way, and I think that's quite helpful for us to thinking about how do we understand the theory and put it into practice. And then finally, I see myself as a curious co-adventurer. And I suppose that's kind of having a deep wonder from my hearing sighted perspective and acknowledging that I have a hearing sighted perspective, but seeking to understand and explore together with the children and people that I work with, and thinking about over the last 25 years, thinking of the number of different co-adventures I've been on with different young people, and each of those has taught me something and been very unique and individual. Okay, so we're going to move on to section 1. So we're thinking about tactile language, exploration and mediation. And I think about this as tactile sign language. What is it that there's so many bits that kind of form part of it? And, if we just think about that first thing, well, tactile sign language, there's actually quite a few terms that get used. So particularly in the UK, we kind of have things like hands-on signing, which is very much the term of the deaf community. And actually, think about it from a signing perspective, it's hands-on. And that's kind of where that sort of term comes from, and the hands are placed on top of the speaker's hands and signs are felt. Whereas educationalists in the UK tend to use hand under hand signing, and that very much has come from the influence of people like Barbara Miles. But they are talking about the same thing. The hands are going on top of the listener's hands are going on top of the speaker's hands. And I think there was a group of educationalists in the UK who said, actually, let's just call this tactile signing. So that as a phrase gets used as well. And then we also have coactive signing, which I think is a slightly different vision. And I suppose I see hands-on signing as being very much the listener's hands are on top of the speaker's hands and they're feeling the signs, whereas coactive sign, as you can see in this little picture here, the speaker is also helping the partner to make a sign. So they're actually kind of almost like correcting there. So you can see here that in the little picture they're kind of crossing fingers, and there's just a hand guiding where that hand position to go. So it's kind of signs that are made together, but with help from the other partner, is probably a helpful way to think of those. So those are kind of under the umbrella of tactile sign language. But then there are also other elements that form part of this full language, if you like. And if we start thinking about alphabets, and we have, we have two alphabets. We have the deafblind manual alphabet, which is where letters are, letter shapes are carried out on the hand of the listener. So kind of here we've got the A, the B, the C. And then you have the block alphabet, which is where the letter shapes are drawn into the palm of the hand. So again, there's two different areas, coming from different groups of people, but actually they both have a role, I think, in various things. And then there are other bits which aren't necessarily quite strictly tactile sign language, but they do kind of bridge people into using tactile sign language. And that's things like visual frame and close signing. So if people's vision is changing, they might start to use sort of an adapted sign language. So where the signing space is reduced or an optimum distance from where a person can see. So they're making best use of the person's residual vision. And then I suppose there's a more physical transition, would be hand tracking, where the listener places their hands on the wrists of the speaker and they follow the signs. And it also helps to bring those signs into that field of vision if you're still relying on some form of visual sign as well. So I think although they're kind of not pure parts of tactile sign language, I think they're definitely part of the continuum and definitely part of how different people start to access tactile sign language. And they're very much more for people who've kind of acquiring their deafblindness, but I think there are some children who still have some residual vision who still make use of these forms of signing as well. And then finally, we kind of get a group of cues, signals, making use of contact points, and so kind of we have things that we'll call on body signs, where kind of the actual signs are made directly onto the body. There's a more evolving group of kind of using social haptics, and again there's kind of a sort of on-body signs has probably come from children's practice, whereas social haptics has possibly come from adult practice. But actually social haptics are more likely to are beginning to be used a lot more with children these days as well. Kind of little bits of information, and they can be quite formal. So you might be describing a layout of a room on someone's back, or it might be that they're doing a very quick message, like the cross here on someone's back might be a kind of it's a fire alarm, we need to move, it's an emergency, we need to move kind of thing. And then we also have, just as another word that's out there, are touch cues, and touch cues can be used very much as a way of giving information. And I kind of separate touch cues out just a little bit because they're not very reciprocal. They're very often just kind of giving information to a person rather than being more of a two-way interaction, which the on-body and social haptics are. So I think I've kind of very quickly covered some of these different elements. And I say this is about how do they all come together, really. And I try to sort of bring it together in a bit of a Venn diagram. So I kind of, if we think we kind of at the main bulk, we kind of might have people using tactile sign language, but to use tactile sign language, you also need to be using some parts of the alphabet. You also might be using some visual adaptations as you're kind of making that transition, or you might be using some hand tracking. And then also you might be using some contact points when you kind of are using some haptics, some social haptics, or some on-body signs alongside. And so I think the thing of kind of putting it into a Venn diagram for me is that they're all part of the elements of making up tactile sign language. But to confuse things, people might also use those systems as communication systems in their own right. So it might be that someone might just use deafblind manual or deafblind block or hand tracking. So it might be that kind of people use these things as a communication, it's a way to communicate on their own, or it may be that they're part of a tactile sign language. And I think these are the words that kind of I've come across are kind of beginning to confuse people, because it's like, well, is it tactile sign language, or is it that they're using haptics? And actually they're probably using a bit of both, and it's part of how do we bring that all together. So those are some initial thoughts. And I'm just checking, we seem to be going okay for interpreting. We're just going to do a quick changeover. Perfect. And then because we just have a quick think about some communication development. And obviously there is kind of quite a there's quite a predictable path for communication development, and then kind of we think we describe these phases and stages quite significantly. And so our first stage is to think about the child begin to respond to people, events, and what's happening, and join you in those shared actions and responses. And it's kind of that first development of kind of you and I relationships. It's how do we relate to each other. It's sort of traditionally that might be called a kind of a pre-intentional stage of communication, but as those kind of you and I relationships are established, the child begins to know how the other will respond, and we begin to share things, and also the child can get the adult to do things. So it's kind of beginning to kind of have more control and more involvement, so kind of that traditionally viewed as intentional stage. But it's also more about kind of actually that you and I relationship, and there's power in that relationship. And we're also beginning to think about a third element coming into that interaction. So it's the you, the I, and the it coming into things. And then we move into kind of what we traditionally call perhaps symbolic development. So we're beginning to use some form of shared symbol, whether that's a gesture, a word, object, or picture, but we're using that to tell somebody else what you want or what you don't want. And we have that shared code. We know that those things that we're using have meaning, and we have shared meaning within those things. And then as development advances, we know that, putting those shared symbols together, we're able to express more complex thoughts and ideas. And finally, well, not finally, because it becomes a lifelong process really, but it's kind of that shared symbolic development becomes very rule governed and systematic, and becomes more of a linguistic, it's a bit more linguistic, so it has more of a language basis to it. But if we think about this kind of traditional how does language and communication develop? We also need to think about the sticking points for people who are deafblind. And traditionally, you know, there's that sticking point between moving into purposeful, the you and I, and then moving into the you and the I and the it kind of relationship. So kind of recognizing that we can relate to other people and get other people to do something else. And there's also a sticking point of making that bridge into using symbolic language of some description. And that's well documented, that there's kind of, it's how do we share those objects in a way that's purposeful and meaningful, and you know, how that might be. And some people put it down to kind of thinking about the difficulty in initiating those interactions. Some people think about it as kind of that kind of more gestalt, or kind of that echolalic repetition of what I'm hearing. So hearing words and repeating them, so kind of echolalic way that persists for a lot longer in deafblind children. Or is it that children require more concrete communication systems? And there's all sorts of reasons as to why these are sticking points, but they're helpful for us to think about. So when we start to think a little bit about, it's complex. Tactile communication is big. There's a lot to it. It is complex. So we want to sort of start that beginning bit of, well, how do we start to kind of let you know what's going on in the world? And we very much think about how do we mediate those experiences? And I want to show a little video about some mediation, and it's me with a friend of mine, just doing a modeling of how we might do some mediation of an experience. And we're using a hand-under-hand approach. So we're using, we'll clarify those in a minute, but what we're doing is I'm not taking my friend Bobby's hands to do anything. I'm just showing her by putting my hands underneath hers and inviting her into my world and what I'm experiencing. So here we have a short introduction. And I'm not going to show all of this video. And here I'm just showing Bobby what we're going to do. And she's quite confident and she explores for herself. And then I want to show her some things as well, but I've not taken her hands and put her hands in anything. I just very carefully put my hands under hers and help to show her what's happening. She's very patiently listening to what I'm doing, and some chance to explore for herself. And then it's about to get very messy. But Bobby was very confident, and she was quite happy to kind of take this experience. But not all children we might see might be so confident to sort of explore something that's perhaps so unpredictable as this kind of messy foam. I'm going to leave that there because we've had a bit of an idea of how we might mediate that together. So the hand-under-hand guidance, very much, Barbara Miles has explained this very clearly for us, and it involves the partner placing their hands underneath the persons as they manipulate and explore objects. It helps because it's non-controlling. It gives the power and the control to the child and the deafblind person that we're working with. It allows the person to know that we're sharing the same experience and we touch the same object and we make sense of those movements together. And most importantly, it doesn't obstruct the most important parts of the person's own experience of any objects they're touching, because they're in control. And because they can, you know, you saw Bobby, she was actually able to come down and go, actually, I'll go and have a go, I'll explore that by myself. And then actually, I was like, actually, I want to show you a bit more. So I could put my hands back under and redirect her. But it wasn't taking her hand and placing it in, as you might do in a hand-over-hand guidance kind of way. And there is a role for hand-over-hand guidance, but we would always suggest that it's used cautiously in sensitivity with the person's reactions, because some people dislike having their hands manipulated and feel threatened by that lack of control. And it also can encourage others to become passive and quite prompt dependent, because if your hands are always done too, you will never learn to use your hands independently, you will always wait for the other person to take your hand to do something with it. So I think it's very helpful to create that distinction between hand under hand and hand over hand. And if we can kind of focus on the hand under hand, it allows us to establish a firm basis for mediation. And it's that mediation that is really central to interactions, shared experiences, and co-creating meaning. So if we can get the mediation right, it then allows us to move on to some language or some possibility of developing some sort of shared use of gestures and individual expressions, which is our next part of the topic. Is this making sense to everybody? I hope so. So we're moving on to thinking about how do gestures emerge and what might individual expressions look like. Thank you for the feedback, people who are feeding back. That's really helpful. And so we need to think for a child who may be deafblind, or even an adult who may be deafblind, where do those expressions come from? What is it? And there is a very complex theoretical viewpoint. I'm going to try and explain it quite simply, because I think it can be done. But I think I say and Anna Nastad and Inga Rudbro, who have kind of written a lot around a lot of this work, are great deep thinkers and have great respect for what they've done. And I think it comes down to their model of co-creating communication, which helps us think about, well, where do expressions come from, and how do we create meaning with those expressions? And their view is that if we have social connectedness and recognition of each other, we'll have that emotional connection. So we kind of at the beginning, we're emotionally connected. And if we add on to that meaningful exploratory experiences, so a way to explore either independently or in a mediated way, and we maintain closeness and contact, so actually physically being close with each other, because as soon as we've moved away from each other, potentially we don't exist anymore. But we maintain that physical contact, embed that within social interactions, so those kind of, even if it's just the you and I, the hand-based games, and eventually that kind of the you, I, and something else, the you, I, and it interactions, we're kind of having those early conversations based just in interaction. We're regulating terms, we're being together. That will lead to the emergence of bodily emotional traces, which I'll talk about in just a minute, but they're kind of essentially tactile memories that kind of that remain traces within the body. And all of these things, if they're in place, will lead to the child producing expressions, the individual producing expressions. So being able to kind of share something about their experience. So I said I'll come back to bodily emotional traces, which I'll very quickly cover. So it's a BET, a bodily emotional trace, and they're tactile memories which emerge from within the body. They might not be able to be seen, but they do give rise to expressions that could have what we call high readability in the context of an event. So within something that's happening, we might see a child do something that we go, that's a trace about the experience we've just had. And what we do know is the expressions that occur from traces, it's possible to negotiate those, and that is possible that they're going to have personal meaning for the individual. And it's likely that that's it, I've just said it, they'll have high readability. When I see them within the context of the event, I'll show you a video, it's probably easier. Because we'll see it in the event because it's got the context and the experience around it. So I'm going to show you a little video about a little girl who's 18 months old with Charge syndrome. And she has a severe sight impairment, reduced visual fields, and some light sensitivity. And she has no hearing. She has profound sensory neural hearing loss. But this video shows the little girl And perhaps one of her early traces, when she's reading a book, and I think she reads books in her own way, which you will see. I'll give you a couple of minutes to see how she likes to play with books. And then she does there's a gesture which we're going to look at in just a minute, which is the expression potentially of what she's been seeing. So let's have a look and see if you can spot. Oops. And there, that little hand gesture, was that about that thing that was on my head, that book? We know it's a book, but she has been exploring it and she has been seeing it, but most of her experience has been around hiding herself under the book and revealing herself. So actually that hand gesture, it's the thing that I have here. Is that the kind of the expression of that's linked to that? Is that what it is? So on its own and out of context, without seeing books, we wouldn't recognize this as being a gesture related to books. But if you see her playing with books and see how she plays with books, we have more context to make sense of how she's doing. And it's that difference between our hearing sighted perspective of what we do with books versus her experience of books. So it's that little hand gesture is potentially where we are. Okay, I'm looking at time and I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to move on to another potential. This is another little boy, and he's a little boy with Norrie's disease, and he has no light perception or useful vision. He has some hearing, but it's been declining and changing. And he does wear his hearing aids, which he's wearing here, and he does pick up on certain words. But when this video was made by his mum, and his mum also has a bit of a Facebook group, and this was one of the videos that she put on her Facebook group. And I said, I really like this video. Could you share it with me? But that's why we've got some of the text over the top. But mum was very interested in kind of these are kind of how he's stims. He's stimming where he's got his rice cake. But let's watch how he explores the rice cake, his tactile exploration, and also then how that might come out as an expression. Sorry, thank you, interpreter. So he's just kind of using his fingers to explore the shape of the hand, of the texture and the crevices of the rice cake. He's got some hand movements. And then he's testing it against his hand, against his palm. And then he's got that. And then underneath his fingers just did this. And his fingers are doing this. And there was just a little, was it a testing and a C-shaped hand? So are those kind of, oops. Where's it gone? There we go. So we have his impressions of kind of as he's exploring, where he's kind of testing and feeling crevices and then bashing. And then there's almost like a thinking trace or gesture where he's just doing this with his fingers, he's holding it in one hand and he's that a kind of a thought of, I'm thinking about the rice cake that I've just had. And again, on its own, it wouldn't have meaning, but actually in the context of seeing him do it, we see that there's more meaning there. Okay, so these expressions or the gestures that originate as bets have high meaning potential, and those gestures can become signs when they're taken over by the partner. So the other within this relationship, we can imitate, because that's potentially how it happens. We can then kind of help create meaning. So it's a transition from kind of something that emerges as a kind of a gesture and a thinking element to becoming meaningful and having that symbolic shared understanding. And there is a process, which is quite a complex process, but actually it can be thought of in quite a simple way. And it's one that I hold in my head quite often when I'm working with children, is thinking about, oh, so the first point is the child needs a motivating and tactily memorable activity. So they need their experience. They need something. So whether that's Ruby playing with the books or Cam and his rice cake, there's something that's tactily memorable about those activities. There's then some sort of expression which kind of comes as a movement or sound that is perceived like an utterance. So that is kind of, that the child does their tapping gesture or their hand gesture. And then as the partner, we need to confirm that we perceive that movement and we recognize that it's an utterance. So if I saw Cam do this, or I saw Ruby do this, I'd kind of suggest an interpretation by doing the same movement. So I'd do the same movement on the child's head. So I might just tap Ruby's head, or I might tap Cam's fingers to go, yes, I see. And is this what you mean? And then give a turn back to the child to either accept or reject. And, it could be Ruby just double tapping again. It could be Cam tapping his fingers again, or it could be a rejection and I don't do that. So you kind of have this sequence of there's experience, utterance, confirmation, interpretation, and acceptance or rejection. And I know that sounds quite a lot, but it's a helpful way of thinking about how do these turns take place in interaction. So I'm just going to show a video, and I think this might be quite a noisy video. I hope if I turn the sound down, I hope I have. And we're playing with it. This is part of a longer sequence where we're playing with a massage bug. I hope that's okay. The sound is quite vibrating on the tray top, but Ruby's here and she has her little finger that comes out as part of her experience, and then I turn off the bug. And I'm just hoping that she's going to come back to us for more. And she brings her hand back and she puts her hand up, and I tap her finger and she grabs it. So we've kind of got that little turn where she's putting her finger up. I'm saying, I see your finger. She's going, yes, you do. That's what I want. And then we have a tug. So we're kind of getting that whole sequence coming through of negotiating that my finger coming up is a way of saying, I want more of that thing. So we're just giving her the means to say, I see what your finger did. We're going to use your finger to ask for more. And she says, yes, I will ask for more. So it becomes a really nice dialogue and a really nice way of kind of going, I want, in these very early stages, I want more of something, which is really helpful. Just to show you some pictures. So again, she experiences it. She presents her movement, which is her finger. I confirm that I see that movement by touching, and I think I double tap her finger. So that's my suggestion. And then she gives a turn and she accepts that by grabbing my finger. And we have reached essentially negotiation around meaning of bringing my finger back. It's helpful, and it's a way of thinking around. I think in the past when I've worked with kids, I'm just looking for something to let me know that you want more of something, which is great. But unless you put that confirmation step in of going, this is what I'm reacting to, you're not giving the child the feedback about what it is that you're responding to. And it helps make it picking up that creating of meaning much quicker, rather than just waiting for children to work out what it is that we've responded to as hearing sighted adults to then kind of allow them to get more of what they want. So I find it quite a helpful process. And this is bringing us, this is doing quite nicely for time, so that's good. It's bringing us to the end of this section. So we've thought a little bit around gestures. How do gestures, where do they come from? How do we help them make meaning? How do we negotiate them? And it brings us back to kind of the end, the main question, I think, of this section, which if we need to hold in our minds, how do I let you know that I know what you know? And I think it's a really helpful little mantra that's been around for a little while. But it's we as hearing sighted partners letting deafblind people know that we know that what they know, because it helps us come together and establish shared meaning, doesn't it? It's the bit of kind of, if we can think this through, how do we know? How does Ruby know that I know that this means book? How does Cam know that I know that this means rice cake? Or how does Ruby know that this means I want more massage bug? And it's thinking through that negotiation process and how we link together is how we can be really, really powerful. Fantastic. So that's the end of section 2. So we're coming on to our last section. I did say it was in 3 parts. And so we're thinking a little bit around concepts, cultural expressions, and exchanges. And so as we're thinking about, well, how do we move from these emergent gestures which have got meaning, our early first word stage, into a full language? And I think we need to recognize that as we move towards what we might call the cultural language, and that could be, for me, that would be British Sign Language, it may be Auslan, it may be the kind of the community language, the community sign language is what we're kind of thinking about when I'm talking about the cultural language. And Paul Hart talks about that it is essential to incorporate the movements and gestures that come from the person who's deafblind, which is what we've talked about, the kind of the movements and gestures of Ruby and Cam. However, this is not sufficient for language to emerge on its own, because it's also essential that the non-deafblind partners bring their own cultural and linguistic experiences directly to any communicative meeting place. So it's about that we need to, children, deafblind people will bring their movements and gestures which have the potential for meaning, and they can teach us so much about what it is to experience the world in a tactile way. Whereas if we want to reach a cultural, we also need cultural and linguistic experience. We need more of a language coming into us, and very often that's based on the visual language. And I know there is some emerging work coming out of America of kind of emerging tactile signs. But I think it's about how do we bring both of those together to a communicative meeting place. And I love the concept of the communicative meeting place, because it sort of says that both partners are bringing something to the party. We're both bringing something that is helpful here. And that's where we're going to get those shared interactions and shared meaning and shared language is going to come from. And I'll come back to that towards the end. But I want to think about, well, what is it that makes something a sign and not a gesture? And if we look at the theory of visual sign languages, when in the study of visual sign languages, when we're looking at what is it that makes something a sign, we look for a number of things. We look for there being movement. We look for there being a hand shape, so some kind of form of hand form. We look for there being a facial expression. We also look for that hand shape and movement to be located. So we look for the location of the sign within a signing space. And we look for palm orientation. So kind of how that hand is orientated in space. And those are the things, if we can describe those 5 features, is what we would consider a sign. And there's been some emerging work of kind of how do we describe some of these tactile signs. And there was some work by Joran Forsgren and colleagues who looked at, they did an analysis of some very early tactile signs and they called them constructions, but they are signs. And the things that they had in common, that the linguistic elements in tactile, were that there was a hand shape, there was a movement, and there was a location. And it's not to say that palm orientation isn't important, or there might not be facial expression, but these were the things that came out of their analysis, and some really helpful piece of work around looking at different sorts of signs and where those different signs come from. But I wanted to start thinking a little bit about, well, what is that journey for moving towards using more signs, if you like? And I've got a number of video clips that I hope expand and show some of these different parts of the language journey. And we're going to go back to the little girl that we saw at the beginning. She's a bit older at this point. She's 4.5. And she is engaged in, she's beginning to use her vision a little bit more, but it's interesting to see how she's still relying on tactile to support her signing. And I can just see here, so she's playing with a little whisking game, and she knows, and the colleague there who's working with her just modeled the cultural BSL sign for more. She did a more sign. She knows it's a very tactile experience in your fingers. And that offers her hands and signs again, but she's kind of listening and she's kind of bringing those hands together. So she's kind of, we know these hands do something, and that's how I get what I want more of. Bit of chat in the background of the video, I'm afraid. And then she's putting it in her hand. And then again, so there she was really listening really nicely to that final sign. So that's great. So there we have, oops, hang on. Oh no. There we go. Phew. I had a little whirring dot and I wondered what I was going to do. So we have more whisking as the, and it's, she's only using, but she's not using a very individualized sign. She's not using a grasp of the whisk to show something about the tactile experience. She's actually moved on a little bit here and is beginning to use a more sign that we've been showing her as well. So initially she kind of, in this first image, you'll see that the therapist who's working with her is actually kind of really leading that and really sort of having to work hard to get her hands in. And the second time, Ruby's kind of grasping and she's bringing her hands together. And then the third time, she's actually more of a listening position and she's doing that. And so she's still using those listening hands. She's kind of having, she's not strictly using talking and listening hands in how we might describe it, because she's sometimes grasping and sometimes, but she's beginning to kind of recognize that that's how those signs are emerging and that her hands do carry meaning, and that that's a new person that she's working with, not her usual intervener. And she's managed to transfer that from a different experience, which is really positive. And then we also have another little video of Cam, and he's a little bit older here, and he's been introduced to some body signs. And so he's been using a hand tap. He's been given a hand to tap for more, and he's been given a touch on his face to indicate eating. And I really like this here because it's beginning to show that actually he's beginning to combine a couple of signs. Oops, I wonder if, oh, there we go. There we go. So, oh, that was very quick. I might have to replay that. Sorry. So the hands out, it's a quick tap for the more, and the intervener quickly helps to guide his, and he taps his face, and so he gets more of his snack. So she's kind of scaffolded. We're going to do, we want two signs here. And he's not ready to have his face stroked whilst he's eating. He turns away rather abruptly. And then there's a quick tap, and then he uses his other hand to independently tap more. I'll show you in some stills in just a second. So here we have a number. So the first time in this sequence, so from the left, these left two pictures, he uses he does his tap in the hand to indicate more, and then he uses his other hand. It's kind of a guided kind of, oh, we're going to do more, and he does that. But the second time, he does it more spontaneously. So he taps for more in his intervener's hand, and then he does a little double tap on his cheek quite spontaneously with his other hand. But what I really liked in the third photo, the third bit on the photo most on the right there, was that the intervener confirms that she saw his eating sign by just sort of tapping the back of his hand, saying, "Oh yeah, you said eat. I saw that." And obviously he got what he wanted, which was more snack. So it's a really, really lovely little sequence of beginning to kind of bring two signs together in a tactile way. And again, it's sort of focusing on some of those very early concepts of requesting as the starting point for kind of initiating interactions. Okay. And then finally, my final example of tactile sign language, and really appreciative of, so this is a published video, and it may be one that people have seen, but I do think it's a really lovely example of someone with congenital deaf blindness who's using tactile sign to explore an experience, but also to recount and think about that experience afterwards. And Gunnar, who's the guy here, whose sign name is Gunnar, has given us permission to use this video, which we're really grateful for. And he's also still in touch with Ingrid and the permission for her to be involved. So Ingrid in this video is 24. She's been blind from childhood and doesn't wear hearing aids and congenital deafness. And Ingrid and Gunnar have had a really long relationship. He'd been her teacher for a number of years by this point. And it's fair to say that Gunnar had set this tactile memorable experience that we could lead to language and support in a way that was really meaningful. So it's set within a narrative structure, so a story structure. There's kind of getting to where we are, but there's kind of the events that happen, and they happen in sequence. So let's play. It's quite long, and it's a Norwegian clip, so they are speaking Norwegian as well as using Norwegian Sign Language, and I will give some voiceover to some of but it's out a lot of what the interaction is being said. I think just knowing that this is Gunnar is quite helpful, and I think everything else is around fishing. Well, they're crab fishing on the dock. So talking about, was that the beginning? Yes, it was the beginning. So the crabs are down on the floor, and he says, Gunnar, the crab's going to go up my arm. I'm going to pull my sleeve up. Help me pull my sleeve up. And she pushes up his sleeve, and he has the crab. And it's going to run up my arm, he says. So Gunnar, and the crab is going to run up my arm. But up it goes, and she's feeling the crab, and she's feeling his arm, and her other hand, she's just checking whether he's saying anything. And he puts it back in his hand. He says, Gunnar, we have the crab, and it went up my arm. And now we're going to pop it back in the bucket. The bucket's down here. And she drops it unceremoniously into the bucket. And he explains that they're now going to be, we're going to get another crab. Come on, it's down here. We're going to put it in your hand, he said. So they pick up a crab. And he says, we're going to put it up your arm. So we need to roll up your sleeve. Come on, help me roll up your sleeve. We'll do it together. Oh. And then here's the crab. And he helps guide it up her arm. And her face says quite a lot at this point. I'm not sure she's overly impressed. But he then recaps with her. Yeah, so what we took the crab and we ran it up your arm. And you felt it, and we could do it again. Here we go. Here comes the crab. Here it comes. Open your palm. Here it goes. It goes up her arm. He says, look, it's here, it's here. She says, yes, it went up my arm. He says, yeah, the crab went up my arm. So they've switched turns there. And now he says, oh, we're going to pop the crab back in the bucket. Down it goes. So they put the crab down. And now this is the next element, which is a recap. And she says, the crab went up my arm. He says, yeah, we had the crab and you felt it in your hand. What happened? She says, it went up my arm. He says, yes, the crab went up your arm. So you can see the crab and it went up. And then she says, yeah, and then it fell down. It fell down off my arm. And it says, yeah, the crab, and it went down and it went on the ground. And we picked it up. We picked it up like this, and you held it in your hand and you felt it. And she says, yeah, I felt it and it went up my arm. He says, yeah, and the crab went up my arm. So it's a very repetitive story of a very tactile experience. And you can see they're taking turns and they're both taking part in, hang on a second, just want to pause that for a sec. So they're both taking part in the story in the moment. They both took part in the interaction. Oh, sorry, start that again. At the beginning, they both took part in the experience. They both took a turn and they talked about that experience. They talked about it during the experience. And then when the experience had finished, they talked about it again. So there was a recap of that experience. So it's the next stage. And then this story, and you saw, I think there's some really beautiful taking of turns between shifting between hand positions. And that's where we link back to that mediation. And mediation being the foundation. It's that hands under, hands over, listening, sharing. Comes straight into the interaction, and it comes straight into think about how do we take turns when we're signing. And they both took turns in that interaction. Gunnar was giving some information and Ingrid was recalling that information and talking about it with him. And then finally we get on to this last chunk of the video. It's very short, but what it does do is it is the same experience recalled the next day. And I think if you were able to notice Ingrid's facial expression, which was very stern, she had her bottom lip out and she didn't particularly look like she was enjoying the crabs on her arm and feeling them go up her arm. But I think here we can see actually, although in the moment she might not have felt it, her emotion thinking about it is very different. So we can see here they're talking. And the big smile on her face as he recognizes that the crab went up your arm. He said, yeah, yesterday we picked up the crabs, you held them in your hand, you felt them. And she says, and they went up my arm. And he says, yeah, they went up your arm. Yeah, and he's got the excitement to that emotion with that beaming smile on her face. He said, and we picked it up again and we held the crab. We held the crab and the crab went up my arm. And it's a really joyful exchange and a joyful experience, thinking about what they had done yesterday. And we've also got that same structure of the very repetitive nature. There's the beginning of picking the crabs out of the bucket, holding them in your hand, going up your arm. It's tactually memorable, so we've created the opportunities for some of those bodily emotional traces to be there. And yet they're able to sit there and have that conversation, that two-way interaction, thinking around that significant event that happened. And so it is a way of just seeing that progress of how language evolves and develops. And by giving language, we'll come on to that in a minute, we'll get language. And I think the other thing just to mention is, I just think hopefully there are really helpful examples of thinking about videos of how language, the path of kind of language development in a tactile mode. I do just want to talk very quickly about that there are transitions in language between first and second language. And I think that there are different transitions depending on the nature of deafblindness. But I think on the left here, we have perhaps a transition from people who are congenitally deafblind, so born deafblind, where they may have an emerging bodily tactile modality. So thinking around some of those bets coming out and they have to make a transition to the cultural sign language in the tactile mode. So you're kind of thinking if their first language might be something which is more bodily and more about how I experience the world in a language way within my body, whereas actually and that's their first language, and we're moving towards more of a cultural sign language of a tactile version of BSL, Auslan, whatever. Whereas actually people who've got acquired deafblindness, they perhaps have got they've got the knowledge of a cultural sign language in the visual mode. And actually what they need to do is make that transition to tactile sign language in a tactile mode. So it's a slightly different transition, but there's also still two languages in that transition to make. So I think whoever we're working with, and I know we've predominantly talked about people with congenital deafblindness today, it's worth recognizing that there's still kind of essentially two elements of language coming in. There's what is kind of is felt within the body, and then what kind of the cultural language might be. And I think that's quite a helpful thing to hold in my mind. And then it kind of brings me to probably nearly my final couple of slides. And I think one of the things that I've kind of come to recognize is that if we meet language, if we're thinking of language as that broad spectrum and including tactile modality and cultural sign languages, if we meet language with language, it offers the potential for growth within that communicative meeting place. And that gives that mutuality, sorry, I can't even say the word I've written, the mutual bit shared by both partners. So what I'm saying is if we meet language with language, we got that potential growth in that meeting place to be together by both of us, because we're both bringing something to the communicative meeting place, as Paul said. And we're both, we provide that opportunity for growth and development if we recognize it, respect it, look for it, and feed it. Really, it's that meeting language with language. I think that's bringing me to the end. I'm just going to do one little plug. Some of the thoughts and concepts I've put into a piece of work called A Framework for Learners Developing Bodily Tactile Communication and Tactile Sign Language, such a snappy title, which is available. You can download on my website. It looks like this if you follow the bit.ly. So it's bit.ly/tactile project, and you can it's a developmental framework for thinking around taking some of the conceptual theory of how tactile language emerges and develops in learners who are deafblind, but also puts it in a developmental perspective. So hoping to bring all of those things together. So yes, that will take you to my website, and you can download it by joining the project. So that's my little plug. And then I think I've reached the end. I just want to thank Leanne and Jerry for keeping up with the signing. But I think that reaches the end.
But I will also, now open it up for questions. No, I don't see any questions. Oh, yep, some have come through. That's great. And I thought, Steve, as always, it was so brilliant. I'm sure everyone's been hanging off your every word. They've been too transfixed to type in any questions. So we have a question here. Let me just have a look. It says, I feel like I've gone through a transformation over the last 10 years that has allowed me to be a more natural storyteller, whether it be a sequenced event or a BET, a bodily emotional trace, as a story of this moment. Wondering about others to move into the narrative frame of reference. Just let me get my head around this. Wondering about others to move into the narrative frame of reference. We share, we finish, we share again. Everything can become a story. Does that?
Yes, I think thank you, Sheridan. And she's also added a further comment, Mary, about supporting others to do it. And I absolutely agree. I mean, I completely agree. Narratives are so powerful. And I think you're right. It's that bit of, just to say, we share, we finish, we share again, and everything becomes a story. And I think that the using narratives as a framework for thinking about what we're doing, I would agree that you're saying you're wondering about how do we support others to move. I think you're saying wondering about how do we support others to move into the narrative frame of reference. And I think it's a tricky one, but I think it's one that we should do, and I think it offers us so much potential. And I think Ingrid and Gunnar show just, I think it's a really clear example of using a narrative structure of kind of doing, sharing, finishing, sharing again. And it just sort of the power that has in that sharing of just seeing how amazing. The first time we saw Ingrid, we saw her kind of go almost quite a worried expression on her face, but actually when you see her recalling it, you can see the joy and the emotion that's there. And is that just because she's being heard and recognized, or is it she's remembering the joy of the experience? And we won't know, but it is wonderful to sort of see how that narrative structure has allowed that communication to take place. And I think it's definitely something to adopt and be thinking for. And I think, how do we do it, if that's part of your question? I think it's kind of, I'm not really sure. I think it's providing examples and talking people through people scaffolding it and thinking about how maybe it's a very, Gunnar says very openly that story structure was purposeful, it was intentional, and it was planned. So I think it's thinking about how do we plan that, and how do we help people to plan that in a way of, if we think about people in schools or in services, people very often want something to do, and perhaps a narrative structure and thinking about a narrative rather than a vocabulary goal or a whatever goal, maybe thinking about a narrative goal might help people to adopt some of that and put that into practice. I don't know if I've answered your question, Sheridan.
It's Meredith speaking. I think that is a really great answer, Steve. And I mean, I'm also thinking about the DBI booklets that have a whole section on narrative, and those videos, and even just sand play and going to the park, these very bodily experiences that have a lot of natural, physical movement that you can replay with children and adults, and that it's one of the things that I love about your videos, Steve, and their videos, that it's there's all this, you can have a narrative without formal language. We've got another question here. Can you please explain the process of developing tactile language in congenitally blind and hearing to tactile deafblind? So I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, because if they're, well, and I'm wondering, actually it does make sense. I've worked with people who are blind but may have a developmental delay. So Steve, yes, if you want to take that question.
I can have a go. I think it's probably huge, and I think so. If I'm right, it's kind of, how do people who are blind and hearing but then become deaf blind? Is it that kind of a? Is it kind of they've had?
I'm wondering if the person that asked that could just check that we are on the right track. It's the way I read it, yes, so they may become deafblind, or they may not become deafblind, but they don't have spoken language, even though they're hearing. That's what I'm taking.
I see. Yes.
We've worked with blind children who don't have language, so using a tactile approach is a really relevant and valid.
Absolutely.
Those kids,
and I don't know that it's necessarily different in some ways, because I think if you're thinking about, because I think what you are looking for is the commonality there, and actually the bit where you're potentially going to create meaning is through tactile means, isn't it? So it's kind of thinking about, so if we think, I mean, in some ways the little boy with the rice cake was, he has some hearing, but he's congenitally blind, so kind of thinking around, well, actually, he's making most sense of the world in his tactile sense. He's beginning to make some sense in the auditory world, but that's a different part of his, but the bit that we were looking at today was him making sense in the tactile sense, and that still gave rise to the kind of those emergent gestures, and then kind of moving on into signs. And it was a very similar pathway for him. And I think it is around, for me, it always comes down, well, let's find the way for an individual. What channels do they have, and how do they access information? And if it is, even with hearing, that they're still accessing things in the tactile mode, then I would still use the tactile mode. I might accompany it with some verbal, with some hearing, but also be kind of really focusing on the tactile as the main source of information and the main way to negotiate meaning in that way. So looking for the things that might have meaning, negotiating them to create shared meaning, and then also introducing some tactile signs from the cultural language, so that you're bringing all of those elements together about giving the best opportunity for language to develop and emerge. I'm not sure if that's completely answered the question, but hopefully it's a maybe.
I'm really pleased to see quite a few questions that come through, and some really positive comments saying people are going to use this in their next session. We've got a question here. Do you have any tips or tricks to help a child who is very insular, hands constantly in her mouth, and to some degree tactile defensive, constantly pulling her hands away? We try to cue her in with a hand to the shoulder, but do you have any other tips or suggestions to try and build her confidence to explore the world around her?
I mean, that sounds like a child who is very into their kind of face space, aren't they? They're very kind of you're using the word insular, aren't they? So the kind of hands are in the mouth, and pulling hands away. And part of that, I mean, there's probably all sorts of things to unpick as to what's going on there. I think in some ways, kind of when we're thinking, hands, if hands are kind of have become quite fisted and kind of or in your mouth, it makes it quite difficult, doesn't it, to use hands as a means to explore things. So I like your idea of cueing in with a hand to the shoulder. That's always a really good sort of, we're starting with a routine, we're starting to kind of establish this is what we're alerting you to. It's almost a bodily social haptic, isn't it? We're coming up here, we're coming down, we want to do something with your hands. Aside, I mean, maybe working, I know we kind of talk about hand under hand being in that very formal under your hand, but maybe there's some bits around hands being beside each other, maybe kind of back to back, so you're just doing stuff together to create interest, to then hopefully get the child to come away from where they are to explore. I'd also look at other parts of the body, I think. So look at kind of where would she use her feet to explore things, and could you do some feet on hands to show things? And is it less sensitive, or is it perhaps a way that you can kind of encourage exploration of the world? And it's kind of depends how old she is, where she is, what kind of setting, those sorts of things. And really establishing, I think the bottom line for me, it's that emotional connection, or that stability, the kind of the trusting relationships, if you like, that underpin all of that to happen. If we really want her to kind of come out of this space, she needs to know, sorry, I'm covering my face, but she needs to know that to do that she's secure in another way. So how is she seated? How is she kind of, does kind of maybe I'm assuming it's a little child and might be where my head's gone, but if they're little enough that you could maybe do some sort of encapsulated seating, that you're sort of sitting behind, not always ideal, but it just might give that sense of security. Or if they're bigger, sitting side by side and just kind of working through the body, if it's shoulder juggling, jiggling up and down because we're recognizing what each other are doing, or recognizing the tension. I'm recognizing at the moment your hands are up here, so I'm going to sit next to you, and we're just going to see together what we are, and hope that creates a little bit of connection.
Lots of great ideas,
very.
Steve. It's coming to mind. I know Sherry's online, but
Yes, I'm thinking of Sherry too.
Sheridan always says, how do I need to be in order to be with you? And you've given lots of ways of being, Steve, which I think is great. I'm also thinking of Claire Fraser's work about what if. It's staying curious, and what if I do this? What if I try this? What if I try this? I think there's a bit of persistence required. But yes, Steve, thank you. I think that's a few great places to start. Now we have a question asking about training for UK interveners or communicator guides. So in Australia, there is limited to no training for people working with deafblindness. And yeah, I think we do have a bit of training for people working with people with acquired deafblindness, but a whole lot less for congenital. So keen to know what goes on in the UK there.
So if I think back in time through the UK, so when I used to work at Sense, I used to work with Jenny Fletcher, who was she established the first intervener training in the UK. She trained me in my intervener training when I first got into the field. And she established the first UK-based course, and it's a 5-day introductory course of some fundamental, and I think Jenny had established it through going to or finding out about the Canadian model. And I know the Canadian model is huge, and the training in Canada is quite a big undertaking, whereas in the UK we adopted actually let's just try and get something really practical and hands-on, and thinking around the people. We were predominantly aimed at supporting, or Jenny was predominantly aimed at supporting people in schools. That was the first sort of remit, but it actually over time has become more, it will support adults and it will support people in social settings as well. So it's our course is a 5-day course. There is a kind of an accreditation option, so you can kind of do a sort of a self-study project after the course and kind of gain a number of points for higher study, which is quite helpful for people in schools who want their we have something called a higher level teaching assistant, which is kind of a way of kind of being paid more in a teaching assistant role, and those points can go towards achieving the qualification for that role, I understand. In recent years, so that was always initially hosted by Sense. In recent years, Jenny has worked independently and still runs the course independently, and there's a group of us who used to work at Sense who still work with Jenny to provide that course. It's still accredited. We're beginning to see a number of other providers starting to look at courses. There is a group in the UK called the National Sensory Impairment Partnership. They're pretty much England and Wales focused, but they're kind of a umbrella group of they're an umbrella group of local authority, so kind of your education authority, your voluntary sector, so all of your charities and other kind of interested people coming together to better the sensory impairment world. And they produced a very short guide to, well, what might the minimum standards be for intervener training? And it was just a kind of a very sort of broad brush tool for kind of going, actually, if there are going to be, what's the minimum training that we expect? So yeah, there's that. And then I think in America, I know we asked about UK, but I think in America there's an online intervener training course, but I think it's very focused to the American market. So it's kind of there's lots of really good stuff, general stuff around deafblindness, but I think it very much focuses to the American system, I believe. I've not looked at it for a while.
One of my colleagues is doing a study tour next year from Australia, and we'll be going to the UK. We're really hoping she'll be able to do Jenny Fletcher's course. I think it'll be a great opportunity for her to bring that information back to Australia. I'm thinking with the last quarter hour or so, you can probably get rid of this slide, but I'll give people one last chance to click on the survey QR code there, but then maybe Steve, you can finish the slideshow so people can see you better.
Yeah, enjoy your face. Like a little dot in the screen. There we go. Is that okay?
that's better. Yep, great.
Amazing.
So we've got another great question here. Do you keep the way that you tell stories consistent? For example, do you always start with you and me, or remember, or before, so that your partner understands this is a memory rather than introducing a new activity? Have you found certain phrases that work for you and your communication partner? Introducing time concepts is difficult.
Time concepts are really tricky, aren't they? I think this is a really interesting question and not something I've thought about. So you're just going to get a very off the cuff result. I'm probably not always consistent in telling stories personally, because I think that's just me. I'm a little bit variable, but I probably, if I was thinking about it and planning it, I would probably start with a remember before you and me, because that feels like a helpful way to kind of, that's quite a few signs, isn't it? But it's kind of, you are sort of signaling, oh, this has happened, it's a memory, it's something that's happened and it is in the past, so you're at least giving the language of it's something that's happened. And then you're starting with the who it's about, so it is the you and the me. And I think that's probably and then thinking, I was trying to think, so thinking about one of a parent that I have worked with in the past, and I saw her recently, and she said, oh yeah, we talk about a lot of remembers, and or perhaps if we're signaling that it's different between if it's initiated by the young person and they talk about, I don't know, say swimming, and then it's like, well, actually, you're not asking for swimming, are you? You're remembering, you're talking, when is swimming, and it's before, and it's, so kind of, I think it sort of depends a little bit, and probably reading the child. But I think if you were starting it, maybe trying to sort of, because you're trying to get someone into a kind of a recap mode, aren't you? I would be thinking about trying to do something that helps them to do that. But so yeah, good question. I'll have to think about that one a bit more, I think. I don't know, Mary, if you've had any experiences of what you found works for you.
It is, yeah, a really good question. I agree.
Yeah, it's really good. Needs writing.
And I think one helpful thing is to do the recap immediately after, like we saw with Gunnar and Ingrid. So you're already building your story, because we tell our stories many times. And so that immediately sets up a few of the motions and the actions. Yeah. So that's one step, but then down the track, the remember or before.
And it's also that we tell stories together, isn't it? And it's that we might tell stories, if you think, you might not tell stories exactly the same way all the time. So it's kind of, but you might sort of adopt different roles, and over times of retelling, you take turns for different bits that you tell within the story. And it's kind of, it's, I think you think about Ingrid and Gunnar quite often said, oh, we got the bucket and we picked the crab up and put it there, and then Ingrid took over and said, and it went up my arm. And it's a supported storytelling. And I wonder if they were telling that to somebody else, how much Ingrid and Gunnar would still do that co-storytelling, and that's part of what everybody does. If you think about how couples tell stories, and it's how, do you remember, you tell this bit, this is your bit of the story, this was you, and that's all just part of natural storytelling approaches, and that probably comes into this, but not answering the question. But we do it slightly differently.
I think it does. I think that does. You're right. Couples do, and a lot of couples like, that is not what happened, and you both have these different recollections. But I love what you said.
And that's part of the story.
Exactly. That's all part of the fun of working out what did happen. But I love what you said about the child might start with swimming. And I think so often we think things are a request. We're so focused on request and trying to teach children to request. And often it's not. It's they're starting the memory. So I love what you said there. And to always...
Are you thinking about swimming? You don't want swimming. You're thinking about swimming. I think... you're thinking that yesterday we went swimming or whatever.
Even to simply mirror back swimming and see where they go with it, not to assume it's like they're remembering or it's the future, or it could be so many things. And so simply mirroring back, I saw you swimming, yeah, swimming. And seeing if they build on that, because they've been received, they know you're with them, you're with the swimming. Where's it going to go from here? And is it a request? Is it a remembering a story? Is it something different? Yeah. There's another good question here. Hi, Steve, and we're getting lots of thanks. Great, it's amazing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's very kind.
Hi, Steve. I am new to this sector. Just wondering if any person can be learning and teaching tactile sign language or only speech pathologists. I am a social worker by background.
That's I don't think it's just a speech pathologist thing. It's I think it's more about the skills and the competence to teach sign language, isn't it? And I think there's I don't know, I suspect that Australia would be the same as the UK, that there's a very, a strong feeling for people teaching sign language should be either from the deaf community or, be very sort of fluent users. And, someone who knows a few Makaton or keyword signs, probably not to really take on the role of being the teacher of sign, because I think that's about getting good quality of sign. And you just need to look on social media and you see all sorts of haranguing of people who get caught being taught the wrong sorts of signs because they've not gone to that level of language. And I think that's really important. I think I wouldn't say that I'd be a teacher of sign per se, because I wouldn't see that I'm at that level. I would always work with a co-worker. And I know the bit that I bring in is about some of that adaptation, but bring it in as very much as a joint way. But it's tricky, I think, and I'd love us to reach the point in the future that we actually had deafblind people doing a lot more teaching of tactile sign and what that means. And I think that's coming through in the American movement at the moment, the pro-tactile movement, if people are kind of interested. And that's kind of about looking at how tactile sign language has emerged from within a particular deafblind community and how they've evolved it and changed it themselves, and that's really beautiful. And then I feel even more of a fraud of kind of being able to talk about it, because it's just like not there. But I think there is it's the bit of how do you bridge that knowledge of information, and then how do you help people to kind of do it. So I would always involve people who are strong users. I don't know what your levels would be in Australia, but I would always be looking for high level trained users of British Sign Language to be in that teaching role. And yeah, is there anything you could add, Mary, on that from?
I guess only that as long as I've worked in deafblindness, there are a range of professions, and it's always interested me that if you work in deafblindness, communication is a critical component. And so anyone working in deafblindness just by default needs to build these skills. And if you're wanting to relate and connect with your client, I would deeply encourage anybody to not think I'm not a speech pathologist, I can't do this, but to start down the path of learning this stuff and having a go. And I just see all too often people scared of getting it wrong, so they're not getting in there. And it is difficult. It's clunky, and you feel like you're getting it wrong. But I think people with deafblindness miss out because everyone's going, I can't do it.
I can't do it. I can't teach it.
Exposed to enough people. So I would really encourage people to get in and give it a go with a clear intent. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to connect, build on the skills and the knowledge that you've learned from this session. By the same token, I hear what you're saying, Steve, that when we're looking at Auslan teaching, yes, that's like that needs to come from a deaf.
No, I would agree, Mary, and it's a very difficult line to walk, isn't it? Because on one hand you do have a very strong language teaching kind of element, but also it's like if we don't do anything, we don't do anything, and then actually then who are we letting go? So it's finding that balance. So I really appreciate that viewpoint as well, and thank you, because I knew you'd have a much more balanced one.
Oh, I think we agree with each other. I think we've just given the different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, so I think we're on the same page and just went top to bottom or bottom to top. Yeah. So yeah, great question. And just there's a couple more, and we don't have a lot more time. Oh yeah, we've really run out of time. And I do see someone with a hand up. So you're very welcome to email me or Steve, and this will be recorded as well, so people can come back and look at it. We've got a shout out from your big buddies, Justine and Alicia, saying they love the presentation. Steve, thank you. And Sheridan's made another great point. Just funny to think of pod structure, which has already happened, is a core branch starter.
Yeah.
So already happened, that story, you're immediately into a story. Yeah. So like happened, finished.
But it's that setting that function, isn't it? Yeah. And I think that's something, isn't it? It's starting with that bit of, if we focus on function as well as on words and meaning, we can that will help things to evolve. I'm not sure if I said it. I meant to say it as part of what we were doing, but focusing on functions of communication is another way of helping to push things through, isn't it? And yeah, that's a really helpful, really insightful reflections and questions, and really challenging questions. So thank you for those. I always love a good challenging question, which I can guarantee that anyone, when I work with Mary, is going to have a few challenges. I love it.
I really appreciate everyone, particularly staying up, starting to get a bit late now on the east coast of Australia. But like people staying up, and the quality of the questions, I think, reflects the quality of the presentation, and it's wonderful that you've really got people thinking about this and how they can apply it, which is exactly what we're after. We don't want this to be nice new information. We want people getting out, really giving it a go, because we know so well that people born with deaf blindness is at such risk of isolation. So I'd also super encourage people to keep videoing. It's so powerful to have these videos and to be able to learn from videos and video experience, because this stuff can disappear very quickly. The gestures, and they're so individual. Yeah.
And it's also that's the bit that helps us work it out, isn't it? Is if we actually, because we need to look at it objectively and separately. And I think, video is so powerful. So
do keep videoing, everybody. People who are new to it, video yourself, and when you look back, you'll learn heaps from looking back at it. And even you might go, like, want to share it with a colleague, and go, what are you seeing here? What might I have done differently? What do you think they mean here? So video is a great way of working.
Use your VIG buddies.
That's right. Study video instruction guidance. We're right on time, so I will thank the interpreters. A huge thank you. To Jerry and Leanne, the interpreters, and to Michelle, the captioner, who came on at very late notice. And so thank you, Michelle, for being so flexible. Thanks to all of you. There's no presentation without participants, but our biggest thanks to Steve for all your preparation. And as I said, breaking some really complex, challenging stuff down into a very manageable and understandable format, and the videos highlight it so well. So thank you so much, Steve.
Well, thank you, Mary. Thank you for asking me, and thank you for listening, everyone. It's been lovely.
Very welcome. Okay, take care, everybody, and we'll see you at our next webinar, hopefully. Bye.